Want to know what it takes to get on podcasts? Today, I'm going to walk you through the exact framework that I use to get on other people's shows. Now, this is an interview replay from a summit interview that I did for the Grow Your Biz Without Social Summit with my friend Gabe Cox. I'm so excited that she let me share this with you today. I know it's going to bless you. All right, let's dive in.
I'm so excited to have you here today for the conversation about media placements and how they can take the place of social media marketing as a focus.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm excited to kind of dive in a little bit more as well about how we got connected because I think that's really fun. And that's going to be a part of what we're talking about here. So you want to stay tuned to that because it's really, really exciting and fun to see how pitching can work. But before we dive too deep, I'd love to hear just a little bit about your relationship with social media. Have you used it in business and how are you currently using it?
Yeah, that is a great question. So, honestly, I did use social media a lot when I first started my business. I talk about this very openly like with my freelance community. I used it as a way to put myself out there, make connections, but let me tell you this, I did not have a big following, number 1, so that's important to know. And number 2, I wasn't posting all the time. Actually, I had an Instagram account that I used kind of like a landing page. So I did one of like those large grid images to share my logo and like the gist of what I do. And I just used it as a way to follow people and connect with them. But I didn't actually post for a couple of years. And so it was cool because I was building a following. People would connect with me on Facebook in different Facebook groups, or they knew me through the work I was doing at the Virtual Savvy and they would follow me and connect with me. So later, when I did feel like I wanted to use Instagram a little bit, I already had like that following base, but I didn't have to be a slave to it to get those followers, right? And they were people who were actually interested in what I was doing. They were genuine connections. So that was a great way to meet people for my business. And Facebook groups was a big thing. But again, it was more about engaging and building relationships. It wasn't so much me actually posting content on Facebook. So that's a really big distinction to make. As far as now, it really fluctuates. So I have seasons where I am very consistent and I am posting content because I enjoy it. And then there's seasons where I've been so busy that I've had to cut back. But the cool thing about it is by the grace of God, I built systems that help my business even when I'm not on social media. So I don't feel like I have to use it. It's more of a supplement and a tool that I can use if I choose to.
I love that too, because I used it a lot when I got started and it didn't really give me a lot of results. But one thing I did like was connecting in Facebook groups or
Yeah.
just finding different connections in that way. And I still have social. And one of the things I do is I go into Facebook groups here and there to ask a question if I
Yeah.
need something or just to do a little connection, but I'm just not there for the most part at
Yeah.
all. I just kept it just in case I decide I want to. But right now, I'm happy not being on because you have used social media along the way in different ways and sometimes a lot more, sometimes less. I'd love to hear a little bit about what results you got out of it. Were you able to see a lot of business come through there, or was it more of a connection type thing for the way you used it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say both. In the beginning, when I was just starting out with my business, I did get a lot of work through Facebook groups, right? So it wasn't necessarily me having this huge platform and having followers and getting inquiries that way. It was more so having some kind of presence that people could go on there and see, oh, she's a real person. She's a legit person, okay, that I can trust, right? Having some sort of presence on there and then being able to go in different Facebook groups and just connect with people and find opportunities. So a lot of my client work actually did come through relationships built on social media. And I've also had people literally reach out to me because they saw what I was doing on social media and they liked it and they wanted me to write copy for them. I've also had people find out about my programs. Recently, I had a boot camp for freelancers. It was called the 2K from Scratch boot camp, and it was how to make your first or next $2,000 with your business and client work. And some people found me through social media because I was talking about it. But again, I do think that there are other ways that you can grow your business, so you don't have to go that route. But I do think it is a great free way to get started if it's something that you enjoy. And for me, I actually do enjoy it. So it's not a hassle.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I love the idea of going and connecting and answering questions and
Yeah.
getting to know people because that is a great way to show up. And you can do that in all different places. You can do it on YouTube, you can do it on social media, you can do it in, I think, forums. Yeah. So I love that. And then as far as boundaries, have you needed to set boundaries for yourself with social media? Have you felt like you've been addicted at all? Or have you just had a really pretty good relationship knowing that you're just using it the way you want, which is the way this is what we're talking about in the summit is if you
Yeah.
want to use social media, it's okay. Using it in the way that feels right to
Yes.
you, right?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, at one point, I did struggle with social media, but this was before I started my business. Around the time that I gave my life to the Lord, I took a huge long break from social media. I actually deleted my Instagram account. I had like over 1,000 followers. It was a lot of people I knew. Deleted Instagram. I almost deleted my LinkedIn. I paused my Facebook account and I just stayed off for a while. And honestly, I would have never came back on, but the Lord put it on my heart that he wanted me to share about him. And that's how my relationship with social media kind of like had a reset. I came back, but I was mainly sharing about Christ and what he's done in my life. And then when he led me to start a business, I did feel led to use social media for that. But it wasn't the way that I used it before. I did feel like it was a little bit easier to use it, I guess, sparingly or for business purposes mainly. There were times where I did have a little bit of kind of like an addictive thing going on where it's like, oh, I want to go in there and see if there's any opportunities. But I think that the motive had changed. So my motive was a lot different than where it was at before, right? Where now I'm going on there and there's a purpose behind it. I'm not just going there to just scroll. Now that has happened sometimes, but like I said, it's not on the level that it was before. So I feel like I've had a lot more self control. I do try to avoid as much as I can being on my phone around my family. So I try to avoid that. And I just try to, yeah, set parameters. I try to time myself. Okay, I'm going to go on there for this amount of time, but this is what I'm doing while I'm on social, right? And just being very purposeful in that.
Mm. The word I love is purposeful. Like having that intention when you go
Yeah.
on, knowing what you want to do and not just falling to into the rabbit hole or falling to the algorithm or the things like that. Like having
Mhm.
the purpose, going in, doing what you need to do, and then getting off. I think that is just even a great boundary in itself.
Yeah, and also you really need to know, is it even good for your business, right? So for my services now, I don't really we have an Instagram account for our company Honey Digital. My husband and I are business partners. So we have a company Honey Digital and that's where I offer my copywriting services. And then I have another business, The Virtual Mama, where I help other faith-based business owners that want to learn copywriting. They want to learn how to start a business from home, right? A service-based business. And with that, God showed me those people that I want you to serve, they are on social media. And you can use that as a tool for me to reach them, right? So, again, being purposeful. But with my services, I don't really promote my services on social media. It's through referral, it's through outreach, it's through getting on podcasts, talking about what I'm doing in other ways. And sometimes people do find me through the work I'm doing with the virtual mama, and I may get clients that way, but it's not a primary source of leads for me in my copywriting business.
I love that. And I love how you were talking about referral and just different ways that you're
Yeah.
getting referrals or work for your service based business. So I think that's a great transition into talking about the how to's of media placements
Yes.
too. So, can you tell us what a media placement is and what the benefits are of focusing on them rather than on social media?
Oh, absolutely. I could talk and talk and talk about this topic. So, a media placement, it sounds super fancy, but in simple words, it's just getting featured on someone else's platform, right? So, this could be considered a media placement, right? It could be for a podcast, it could be for a virtual summit, it could also be for an article on someone's blog or online magazine or in a physical magazine or a newspaper. So, it really depends, but it's simply just being featured on another platform. As far as the benefits go, I love media because, first of all, it's typically evergreen, right? You can put in the time to create a podcast episode, and that thing is going to live online, and people are going to keep finding it and listening to it. And if you have a blog, they may find it through SEO if you're sharing about it there. And so it keeps working for you, even when you're not, versus like social media, where you have to keep putting content out there to be in front of people and stay top of mind, which it has its place, but you may not want to do that all the time, right? And another thing that I love about media placements is it helps you expand your audience organically through collaboration. It helps to build relationships. I've met so many amazing women just through doing podcasts, interviews, and also having guests on my show. It's been amazing for that. And it's also a great way to build authority. So you are going out there and exposing yourself to someone else's audience, and you're exposing yourself as an expert, right? You're giving value, and they're getting to see what it is like to work with you before even paying you for your service or your product or anything.
Ooh, yeah, I love that. And one other benefit that I'm thinking of as well, in terms of social media, I think social media is a fun way to connect, but it's not like that deep connection. You don't really get
Yeah,
to talk to people, right?
for
And so
sure.
when you're doing these media placements, like you and I are doing right now, we're having a conversation. No, we're not in person, which would be even more fun,
Yeah,
but it's like we're getting a little bit deeper. We get a little
yeah.
bit more of a connection, and that I feel like business can be really lonely when you're doing it online. So having these connections will help with that. And I feel like that's something social media just can't do.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. So, how about for those business owners who don't really have a large audience of their own? What kind of media placements would you recommend for them?
Oh, I love this question. I love podcasts. I have a podcast, Business in His Image, and I also listen to podcasts all the time. And so I feel like podcast is such a great way to get started. There's a lot of ways you could go with this, right? You could try to, write blogs. You can try to write guest blogs for other people and all of that sort of thing. But I think starting with podcasts is just a great way to reach people, build authority, and like you said, establish that deeper connection. The key with that is if you're new, and you don't have a big audience, that's okay. You want to just aim for outlets where it makes sense, right? Maybe someone just started their podcast and they want speakers on there. Reach out to those people because if they have a similar sized audience as you, then there may be a higher chance that they'll be open to having you on as a guest. What you have to keep in mind is it's not necessarily about your audience size, right? You can reach out to a bigger podcast and pitch yourself. And if you're giving amazing value and your pitch is great, there's no reason why they wouldn't love to have you on their show. But what you have to keep in mind is that those bigger shows have higher volume of competition for guests because so many people are reaching out to them. So you really have to work hard to stand out. So it's not that you can't get on a bigger show or get a bigger media placement. But you just have to keep that in mind that it is going to be higher competition. So starting small to kind of build up a portfolio of media placements. And that way, when you do reach out to people, you'll be able to say, hey, this is what I sound like when I'm speaking, right? And they'll be able to tell that you're someone that's going to give value. You're going to show up, you're going to know how to have good etiquette and all of those things. So start small, don't be afraid to reach out to bigger shows, but you do want to build up kind of like a portfolio so people know what you sound like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love also if you have a podcast or you're thinking about having a podcast, you can do podcast swaps, which is a great
Yes.
opportunity because it's a win-win for both
Yeah.
of you and it's an easy pitch. It's much easier than pitching like cold, right? Where you
Yeah.
have like something to offer them as well. Like let's collaborate on my thing and we'll collaborate on your thing and we'll give each other's audience a lot of value.
For sure. Yeah.
Now, I know that one thing that holds entrepreneurs back from actually reaching out for these media placements is that pitch that you're talking
Yeah.
about. It's
Yeah.
really scary to put ourselves out there and really hope that somebody will respond. A lot of times you might hear
Yeah.
crickets if you're especially if you're pitching those larger shows. They may not reach out or answer back right away. So what tips do you have for creating or crafting a successful media pitch?
Okay, so I'm going to preface this with saying that I am not only giving you this information as someone who has been on podcasts, but someone who has a podcast. Okay. So I get pitched to all the time and I see a lot of bad pitches and I've also received a lot of good pitches. And the surprising thing is, I've had people on my show who have a very small audience or no audience who they've been on my show because their pitch was so good and they gave so much value, and on the flip side of that, I've had publicists reach out to me with like people who have a somewhat bigger platform and their pitches were not good. Okay. So I'm giving you this information with that context in mind. So I'm telling you, if you follow this framework and you do it consistently, you're gonna see results. You are gonna get on podcasts, okay, if you follow this framework. So There's 6 steps. It might sound like a lot, but they're very simple steps, right? So when you are reaching out via email, number 1, you need to do research. So you need to figure out what is the proper way to reach out to this platform, this podcast. Go on their website and see if they have a process in place for that. Because if they do, you don't want to try emailing their personal email. That's just annoying, right? People do that to me all the time. Somehow, some way, they find my personal email and they're pitching to my podcast where I already have a process in place. And so it's not great. So make sure you follow their process. If they have a form and they tell you not to follow up via email, then don't follow up via email and just trust that they're going to look at the form. Okay. And if they don't, then maybe that podcast just wasn't for you. But follow their process. If you don't see that they have a process, try to see, do they have a team? Is there an email that you can reach out to specifically for that podcast, right? You want to do your research. Don't just email any random email. That could work against you. Once you have the proper contact information, you want to research their business, their platform, listen to some episodes, show that you care about the work that they're doing and respect it because it's so much work to run a podcast. And so you're over here trying to pitch yourself to come on their show, right? Because you want to expose your business and your product, your services to their audience. You should come with, honoring them for the work that they're doing and come from the perspective of you want to give value to their audience. And yes, of course, it's going to benefit you and all of those things, but that's not what you want to lead with, right? So that leads me to the first part of the framework, which is make your hook about the person or the outlet that you are pitching to. So this can work for other kinds of pitches, but with a podcast specifically, you want to make your first line about them, right? It's even better if you've been following that podcast or if you already like their content, because then you can genuinely say, hey, I've been following your content. And it's even great if you're able to reach out to maybe smaller podcasts that you already listen to, because you can establish that connection, right? So make the hook about them, something that you loved about their podcast, maybe something that they shared specifically for them to see that you actually did your research. That's the first and most important part. If you can avoid using the word I in your first sentence, even better. Definitely try to avoid that because you don't want to make it about you, right? Then the second is you want to get to the point of why you're reaching out. So after that hook, now you want to get to the point and say that you are interested in being on their podcast. Say it in a respectful way, something along the lines of, if you are accepting guests on your podcast or looking for new guests, I would love to serve your audience and talk about XYZ, right? Very simple. These people are busy and are receiving a lot of pitches. So keep it to like one sentence. And then after that, you want to share some bullet points of relevant topics and even potential titles. Like do the thinking for them. You don't want to pitch yourself and then give them more work to do. You want to make it as easy as possible. Okay, this is speaking from someone who has a podcast. So give them relevant titles. Make sure that it's relevant to what they're already talking about on the podcast. And make sure also that they do have guests, because if you take time to pitch to someone and they don't even have guests on the podcast, you're wasting time. So make sure that you're pitching and they have guests and that you're not duplicating topics that they've already talked about, because they're not going to accept you. You want to do that in a bullet point format and make the email really easy to read. Don't write these. I get these emails. I don't know if this happens to you, Gabe, but I get these. It's like one giant paragraph and I'm trying to skim it and it's really difficult to skim. And the sad part is these are publicists who are being paid for this, who have like 20 years of experience in PR. And I'm like, how do you not know not to do this? It blows my mind. I'm not even really a publicist and I know not to do this stuff. But anyways, I could get on my soapbox about that. So make the email formatted so that it's easy to skim, share those relevant topics. Then after that, only after you've done that and showed how you can give value, then you can write a little bit about yourself, right? Just a few sentences, not a big paragraph. You don't want to give your entire bio. You want like 2 to 3 sentences. It shouldn't be more than 3 lines, honestly. 3 lines in the email that talk about who you are and why are you a good person to talk about this? Do you have some experience in a certain field that gives you credibility, right? So, just a couple of short sentences about what you do and why you're qualified to talk about this subject. And then from there, you can share any relevant links, any relevant media placements you've had in the past. It doesn't matter how big or small, but just showing that, you do speak, that it's a thing, that this isn't your first time going on video or going on a podcast, even if it's your own platform, but you can say something to the effect of, if you want to know what I sound like, here's a link to, this video that I did talking about XYZ, or here's a link to my, latest interview that I did on such and such as podcast. Share your website, any relevant links. You'd be surprised how many people don't do this. And when I get pitches, I don't often get links, and so it's creating more friction because now I have to do more work to see if you're even a good fit. And if I'm busy, I might not do that, right? So share relevant links and then close out. Number 6 is to close out with something friendly, something very lighthearted, like, thank you so much for the consideration. Either way, I'd love to stay connected. I love what you're doing, right? You don't want to be too aggressive in your pitch. So that's my framework. That's what I've been using. And by the grace of God, it's been working well for me.
Yeah, I love that framework. It's simple, but it gives you those key points. Like you were pointing out, I'm a podcaster as well. I get tons of pitches. I can tell if someone uses Chat GPT. Okay, there's a tip.
Yeah.
Just be you,
Mhm.
you
Yeah.
know? And if you have a smaller audience size right now, maybe don't use a PR. Just be you. Just reach out
Yeah.
as you. I actually
Yeah.
tend to gravitate toward those who are reaching out themselves. I don't
Yeah.
know if you
Same.
do, Joe, but yeah, I feel like there's more
Same.
personability with that. Is that
Yeah.
a word?
Yeah.
And then also, don't I like what you were talking about. Don't make it about you. It's
Yeah.
about the podcaster's audience. I want to know what value you're going to bring to my audience. And when it comes to those topics, look for those popular topics that that person has been doing and put a different spin on it and
Mhm.
make it just that, because if it's a popular thing for their audience, they're going to be more apt to say yes to, especially if it has kind of a different framework or a different spin or something you haven't talked about when it comes to that topic. But I think keeping it light and showing that you actually do know a little bit about us, the research is important. Like the worst is when I hear
Absolutely.
someone go, "I love your podcast," and then I realize they never listened to an episode.
Yeah.
I don't think you need to listen to an episode to pitch, but you definitely shouldn't say that you listened if you didn't, right?
Yeah.
Like you
Don't
can
lie.
tell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Be
Um,
authentic.
yeah. And the worst for me is I have a boy name. I'm Gabe, right? So I get pitched, and people like either pitch me like thinking I'm a guy, or they pitch topics like related to males, right? And I'm like, but that's not my topic. I'm
Yeah.
pursuing goals God's way for women entrepreneurs, right? So it's
Yeah.
like you really do need to know what the
Yeah.
podcast is about.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And another little tip that I'll add, I learned this from Christina Nicholson. She's a seasoned publicist. She taught me that when you are pitching to any kind of media, but of course, this applies to podcasts as well, let the media outlet know that you are going to share that media placement because that is big. You would be surprised how many people actually don't do that. I had one woman on my podcast. She didn't have a big audience. She's a service provider, so she doesn't have, a podcast or anything like that, but she's a woman of faith and she had a great pitch, very respectful. When she came on my show, she shared that episode with her audience. She just shared it on social. And mind you, she has a smaller social following, but her podcast interview for some time was one of my highest downloaded podcasts. And it's so funny because I've had people with bigger audiences and hers like kind of topped up with some of their interviews because number one, her content was amazing. She gave so much value. Her pitch idea was phenomenal. And number two, she actually shared it with her network, even if the network was small. So let them know that you're willing to talk about it and share about it. That's huge.
Yeah, and that's something to think about too when you're pitching. Pitching smaller audiences or podcasts that are a little bit smaller with smaller audiences is not a bad thing because they're going to be
For
more
sure.
willing to promote than those bigger names because
Yeah.
they don't need to promote, right? So
Yeah.
that's a big deal. I love this. I love the framework. I want to talk a little bit, Joe, too, about how we got connected because we got
Yeah.
connected on a pitch by you. So tell
We
us a little bit about
did.
it.
It's so funny. So one of the things that I do in my business is I like to collaborate with other business owners who are aligned with a similar audience, similar values. And so, in one way or another, Gabe, I came across your podcast. So, number one, this shows the power of podcasting, right? And long form content, because that's how I found you. And I think it was through Apple Podcasts. I was just browsing and I was like, wow, this could be a great fit for a collaboration. So, I reached out and I pitched to be on your podcast. And it's so funny because you actually were thinking of eventually reaching out to me, which I didn't know at the time. So in that way, like we got connected and when I reached out, it's a step of faith. Like you're doing this, you may not always get a response. That's okay. Keep going, right? I don't always get responses, but in your case, I did. And it's so cool because not only am I part of your summit, but you're also going to be on my podcast. And now we're building a relationship. And, we have similar values and we're, going to build friendship. And it's just like so many cool things that is going to come out of that one pitch. So you just never know what it's going to lead to.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those God moments. Like it was a
Yes.
divine appointment because my biggest client, I'm a success coach in her entrepreneurial programs and I'm one of her community managers and things like that. And I had heard Joe on her podcast. Now, this podcast is a large podcast. So Joe got on a really large podcast. And the funny thing is, I heard it and I was like, wow, this is a really good podcast. I can't even remember what the topic is, but I'm like, I like Joe. She could be my people. So I had it in mind. I actually had her name written down as a
So cool.
potential at some point. I just was in the middle of craziness. So I wasn't pitching podcasts at the time. So when she reached out, I was like, this is so cool because I had
Wow.
Joe in mind all along. And so I just think that sometimes things like that happen too. And
Yeah,
then also as you do it, you can like get referrals, like it
for
you'll
sure.
you'll see different places to ask or different podcasts that are relevant, or once you've been on some, then people see that as an authority for you to be on more too. So I love the connection that we made just through that
Yeah.
pitch, and it was a simple pitch with the framework you shared, and it really caught my attention.
Oh, that's so awesome. Glory to God. And I will say, like, literally the framework, because when I was preparing for this to have this talk, I was like, okay, I know the framework in my head, but I need to get it down on notes so I can share it. I literally just went back to the email that I sent you just to get the gist of what I did, right? It works. You liked it. So that's a good sign.
Yeah, absolutely. So now in all of this too, it's really important to build our businesses in a way that aligns with our values. And I also believe it's important as we build business relationships. Now, I know you talk a lot about this, aligning your business with your values and
Yes.
building price-centered relationships and things like that. What have you found that works well for finding and building relationships that do align with your values?
Oh, yeah. I can share about this from firsthand experience because it was kind of hard at first. There are so many different people online. And, I love people regardless of your background. God loves all people. I love all people. But at the same time, the Bible does talk about not being unequally yoked. And so when you're looking to form those deeper connections, you do want to look for people who have similar values as you. And so this was hard for me in the beginning. I remember being part of a phenomenal community online. But then it started becoming a problem because of certain things that were brought up. And I just couldn't identify myself with some of the people in the group because of the differences in values and that sort of thing. That's actually why I even started my membership, Disciples Who Dream Society, so that people of faith could come together and not only meet their business goals, but also their faith goals, right? So, one of the first things that I did was pray, honestly. And God literally, He will bring the right people to you if you pray. And that's the thing we have to remember is that God is in the details and we can involve Him in every aspect of our business journey. So, if you find that you're struggling to find that community that aligns with your values, pray about it because then God will start doing the work that only He can do to put those people in your path. So that's the first thing was prayer. And then the second thing is going to where those people are. You know, if you are looking for another woman of faith to connect to who's in a similar place as you in business, where would she be? Where would you find her? Is there a Facebook group that's relevant? Maybe a good starting point would be to listen to other faith based business podcasts like Gabe's or mine, for example, right? To find out the communities that those podcast hosts are a part of. That's a great way. That's how I've learned about some communities. Also, finding businesses that align with those values. Are they openly talking about their faith? Because if so, maybe their social media platform is a good place to get started if you want to just connect, right? Like I said, you don't have to be necessarily posting on social to connect via social. Okay. That's kind of a good way to start. And if there are local groups or events going on in your area and you actually want to go somewhere in person, that can be a great way as well. But I think prayer is the most important because God will give you the wisdom to connect with those people.
Yeah, and he'll give you those divine appointments just like Joe
Yes,
and I had, right? I've had so
exactly.
many of those along the way.
Oh,
And
I love
especially
that.
like even when the days that I'm most discouraged
Mm,
or when I'm like, "Ugh, I just don't want to do this anymore." Because those days happen. Let's just get real. But it's those moments that I feel like God shows up and says, here, I got another encourager for you, or I have
yeah.
another connection for you, or something. And so prayer works. And just staying steady. Because I think sometimes we have kind of a minimalist mindset or a scarcity mindset, like, well, if I don't do this with this person, then maybe this isn't going to happen. And it's like, no, you can wait and do business that aligns and that is right for you, and it will grow. So I love these pieces, these little nuggets that you gave us for being able to build those connections. And the first resource that you have is a 5-day devotional called Build a Business That Honors God, which I feel like aligns really nicely with what we were just talking about. Can you share a little bit more about it?
Yeah, so it's a 5-day email devotional. So when you sign up, you're going to get an email every day for 5 days. And it's a short devotional. It's not super long, but it's actionable. It's going to be related to something that you can start doing today in your business, whether it's shifting a certain perspective, prayer points, very practical, tangible things that you can do to keep Christ at the center of what you're doing in your business. And I believe that it will be a great encouragement to you. I also share an additional free resource. It's completely free. I'm not upselling anything at the end. It's just really for the purpose of serving those out there who know God gave you a dream and you know you're supposed to do it, but you want to do it in a God honoring way. And there's so many resources out there that don't align with our values. And so it can be hard. So I just felt it on my heart to create resources like this one that are going to speak to that, right? How to keep Christ first, but also don't be afraid to dream. Don't become so boxed in that you think that God doesn't want you to have dreams or God doesn't want you to enjoy your life because life is meant to be enjoyed. And those dreams are God given when you're in alignment with Him, when you're hearing from Him and you're in tune with Him. A lot of those dreams in our hearts actually do come from Him. And He wants you to use your God given gifts to glorify Him, to serve people out there. And so always remember that whatever gift God has given you, there's someone out there who could be praying for the problem that you solve. And so you're doing a disservice by not fulfilling that, right? So I went on a little tangent there, but essentially that devotional is it's going to bless you and encourage you in your business and your faith.
I love that. I love that. It's like he will give you the desires of your heart, but that's because your desires will be aligned with his because he's putting those
Amen.
desires in there if you
Amen.
are aligning with him. Yes, exactly.
Yep.
So, and then you also have a free business resource as well called the Free Revenue Accelerator Guide. You are an overachiever here. I love it. Tell us a little bit about what they'll get inside that.
Yeah, so that is a framework that you can use to build your business, even if you don't want to use social media or paid ads. And it really hones in on your messaging, like how to, first of all, make sure that you're reaching the right kind of clients that can afford what you have, that are a good fit for what you have, how to craft the right messaging to attract those people, and then how to use that through authority building content to grow your business. So it really ties in beautifully with the topic that we spoke on today.
I love it. And remember, Joe is an expert copywriter, so she knows what she's talking about there when it comes to messaging. Thank you so much for sharing these amazing resources with everybody. Joe, this has been incredible. Thank you so much for this conversation. And we are so thrilled to have you here. It was packed with so much value. Just appreciate you.